Good afternoon. You are joining the 2020 Virtual Freedom of Information Summit presented by the National Freedom of Information Coalition. Thank you for joining us. This is the 31st Annual Freedom of Information Summit, and on behalf of the organization, we are thankful for your participation. My name is Valerie Lemmy, and I am the Director of Exploratory Research at the Charles F. Kettering Foundation in Dayton, Ohio. The moderator for this session, entitled, Are Virtual Public Meetings Sustainable? If you want to keep your network informed about this session, please tweet hashtag FOI Summit, FOI Summit, hashtag FOI Summit. We have a great panel for you this afternoon, and I'm sure they will provide some thought-provoking commentary for us today. I will introduce them as they speak. But just for your information now, we have Dr. Larry Schooler, who is a former journalist and now a senior fellow at the National Civic and Director of Consensus Building and Community Engagement. Graham Stone, the VP of Government Relations, publicinput.com. The Honorable Lauren Poe, Mayor of the City of Gainesville. And Mayor, I know you have a new city manager there, a colleague of many of ours on the phone. And we welcome you to the conversation today. And a good friend and colleague and partner with us at the Foundation, Courtney Breeze, the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. Before they start, just a few minor housekeeping notes. We will have Q&A no later than 2:45. We will end the session at 2:55 today because another session will start at the top of the hour. Please put your questions in the chat box, and that way we'll have the opportunity to respond to whatever you might be interested in talking about. I will call the speakers in the order they are listed on the program and ask them to speak about the topic for no more than 5 minutes, and then we will begin our Q&A. To start the conversation, I'll just begin by talking about the impact the pandemic has had worldwide. On public deliberations, on people coming together, on city council meetings, and the ability of citizens to engage with and be a part of the discussion on public issues. We know that some communities have been extremely innovative in the work that they have been able to do, Larry, online. You will talk a bit about that. And others just were concerned, didn't know what to do, weren't prepared, didn't have a plan B, and quite frankly, stopped being attentive to the interest of citizens, used their emergency authority to make decisions unilaterally without public input, and often did not respond to requests for information from the public. Certainly for all of us, that's a concern. Transparency, democracy, engagement is what all of us on this particular panel are all about. And so I hope that in your comments you will address the sort of frightening implications of using emergencies to ignore the opportunity for public input. But on the good side, there have been wonderful innovations and tremendous creativity. And I hope that you will also have a chance to talk about that briefly. And I hope those of us that are watching on the sidelines have an opportunity to provide you some really good questions. And so Larry, would you start the conversation for us today, please?
I'd be happy to. I'm smiling, Valerie, because I never get this chance, even in my own home, just to start the conversation and have, 5 or 10 minutes without interruption. Mayor Poe might be able to relate. I know Graham has kids too. At any rate, thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be on with this great panel. I mean, Graham's work is certainly in public inputs is one that I've admired greatly from afar, and I'm glad to see them do some work in my former city of Austin. And Courtney obviously has a tremendously meaningful leadership role in this field. And Mayor Poe and I have gotten to work together a lot recently because the city manager that you mentioned, Lee Feldman, who's a board member at National Civic League, recognized fairly early on that the combination of COVID-19 and the need for civic engagement would necessitate some sort of workaround for the public to be able to participate. And it's funny, when I was hearing you talk and you used the word emergency, I kept thinking about, if I were faced with a decision in an emergency situation, I just feel like the higher the stakes, the more I would want to check in with somebody, whether it's my wife or my, kids or my employer. I mean, there's just all these people that I feel like I would need to consult if it were a really serious situation. So there's a little bit of irony in the sense of having certain communities or governments say, there are emergency issues and we don't have time for engagement, which is certainly something I've anecdotally heard be said in certain corners. Mayor Poe can certainly speak to this better than I, but we certainly are living in a time where governments, local government as well as state and federal, and for that matter regional, are making incredibly consequential decisions that are going to impact people's daily lives, including their abilities to make a living, their abilities to feel safe, their abilities to get back on their feet from either having COVID-19 or having it impact them in some other way. And so, the old mantra that those affected by a decision should be able to affect that decision is as or more true today than it was prior to the pandemic. And yet it forces us to get very creative. And, I think that one of the interesting things that has happened in the field of public engagement is that we've generally bifurcated it into in-person and online. And I say this with obviously the great amount of respect for public input. But Pew Research and other data sources tell us that as many as a quarter of all Americans lack reliable home internet access to even participate in what we're doing here right now, at least via video.
Very good. Thank you so much, Larry. We've already got some questions coming in, so I'm sorry. Appreciate that.
Were you able to hear me there? I think I got muted.
Yes, we were. Can you hear me?
Yes. Is it okay if I say a little bit more, or did you?
Oh, I thought you were done. You stopped talking.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened there. I think Zoom said that's enough.
All right, sounds good. Yes, please, Larry, do continue.
No, I was just going to say that there's been some other statistics lately around internet access for school children, and I have two at home who are attending school virtually, but they're privileged to be able to do so because not only do we have enough devices, but we have enough bandwidth. So that's all to say that I think a lot of government agencies had not invested at all in what I'll call a menu of different engagement opportunities, meaning that they had expected people to show up physically to either City Hall or to whatever the public meeting was, or many of them had invested in internet-driven solutions, which are fantastic. Public input is one of them. But even I think Graham and others would tell you that it's not just that we're potentially leaving those without broadband access at the front door, but we're also, we're sort of focused on a class of people for whom engagement online is a thing that they feel comfortable doing. And I don't think that's something we can necessarily take for granted. So for both the mayor's city of Gainesville and for another client, we've essentially, I like to tell people, I feel like in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel when she's the switchboard operator, that's kind of the role that we're playing. But we're standing up a toll-free number and the public calls in to make a public comment, and we organize that and orchestrate it for the commission as if they're there. And the technology is not all that sophisticated, and yet we are doing our best to give voice to an audience that might not otherwise have a voice, even in the best of times, much less during a pandemic. And the only other point I would say about that is we are all, meaning to say all of us in America, sitting on a resource that is largely underutilized, which is a television station, meaning almost every government agency in the country is both entitled to and has use of a television station purely for government purposes. And we know that they put the official city commission meetings on, and not to besmirch the mayor's own entertainment value, but those may or may not be the most captivating broadcasts. But if we're able to do something that is more interactive, more kind of meant for audience participation, the results can be remarkable. And I've had the chance to do that for cities like New York and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Houston, where thousands of people might join a broadcast like that because they're able to call in or text in. So that's all to say that I think we really have to be thinking not just about the sort of most sophisticated levels of technology that are available to us, but about something as basic as being able to pick up the phone and literally have your voice heard, particularly in a time like this. So a lot more I could say. I think Zoom is telling me to stop, so I'll stop.
Thanks so much, Larry. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk with you. And we're just glad to have you here. And those comments really, as I said, have sparked some interesting input and suggestions from those who are watching the program today. I would now like to ask Graham Stone, who is the co-founder of Public Input. He serves also as the Director of Consensus Building and Community Engagement, titles that ring in our ears as amazing and outstanding. We really do like to hear that. And Graham, you come from a beautiful location, Oak Island, North Carolina, that we're all moving to. So tell your family to get ready. You're about to have a whole set of new neighbors. Graham, can you talk to us about Are Virtual Meetings Sustainable?
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. I will extend the compliment to the backyard of those who are responsible. I just get to sit in it, but no, I am excited to share really just experiences. As Larry mentioned, we're really at this point, right, grateful for so many communities to utilize our software for exactly what he mentioned, right? Equity in the process. A little bit of background on us. We were founded in 2013, so in the grand scheme of things, not that long ago. And originally the effort was based on actually Courtney and I had this conversation just the other day, asynchronous engagement, right? So the idea that people can't take a minute out of their day at a set time too often. So we provide these opportunities over a period of time. And so we built, survey tools and email workflows and all the normal ways that the public would traditionally participate. And we actually had a live meeting as the traditional, right, public meeting were hosted, sign-in screens and live polling tools. But all of that was meant to supplement and I'll call it, it's funny to say this, the old way. In April, right, we all said, oh boy, okay, this isn't applicable anymore. And we had to shift gears, and we're, as a software company, right, tasked with being agile and built out a virtual public meeting tool that allowed for people to participate in government so that we didn't have to cancel meetings. We saw it across the country, widespread. Everybody saying, whoa, put it on hold, we'll make no decisions, government grinds to a halt. And that, of course, wasn't sustainable. So then you saw decisions being made along the lines of, okay, we'll piece it together and figure it out so that the public can be involved. Or in unfortunate circumstances, we're just going to keep it shut down. We're going to exercise emergency authorizations, and we're not going to involve the public, or we're not going to make these decisions. And that is what the goal really is to prevent. The challenge, though, right, when we saw all of these communities, I actually was on a webinar some time ago, and I think it was a city in Arizona, but I can't remember. The IT director of the city said, yeah, we've we've actually figured out how to do this, and we got them up and running, and it was an incredibly early effort. And so the moderator said, well, tell us how, what are you doing to prop up these, open and accessible virtual meetings? And he said, well, it was easy. We just combined 6 different softwares. We had Zoom to stream the video. We had Granicus to, as Larry said, put it on cable access. We had Qualtrics so that we could ask for survey, questions and engage during. We integrated that with Facebook so that people who weren't able to get to a television could live stream it. And then we used Cisco for the phone line. And then lastly, to transcribe it all, we used a software called WeTransfer. And of course, my head, right, in an IT sense and knowing something about software just exploded. That's really where we have to focus. Accessibility, equity, like Larry said, the opportunity to participate by phone is critical. When you ask the question about sustainability, it's not whether or not the public, right, is looking at this as sustainable. This is not an option. We have now become used to, we expect government to adapt and learn. This will remain, whether we who are behind the technology like it or not. The sustainability comes from how we're going to make this easier on the people that facilitate these types of things, the city clerks, the moderators in any kind of consulting project, reducing, we call it technical debt, but the number of platforms that you have to buy, manage, understand to implement this. And so as a company, what we have done is integrated all of those things into the platform so that you can have a phone line. You can have the live streaming through cable access, and trying to make that simpler on the other end for the admins. The best example I've got of a wonderful case study, and the folks in the city of Asheville would happily answer anybody's calls regarding how they have managed this. They have, and many of you may know this, they have undertaken a conversation at the city council level on reparations and police reform. Talk about 2 things that will bring public comment, right? And they're doing this without meeting in person for their council meetings. Now, fortunately for me, I get to see it and learn from it because they're using our software. Their city council meeting in July, I think it was the 14th, had 164 people attend. They received 138 public comments, average of 3 minutes apiece. That's about 8 hours, right, of public comment. Those people, right, there's no way that they could have actually fit that into the meeting. It ran for 5 hours as it was. So by using software, and it doesn't have to be ours, you can piece these things together. Larry has made wonderful examples in Gainesville and other places of how this can be done. You don't have to buy a proprietary software like ours, but you do have to focus on the process behind it for this to be sustainable. You have to have a place where all of these things come together. Public comment is attributed, it's stored, it's then, right, of course, put in some format for council to understand. And so you asked the question about sustainability, and I put it more on us, right, as the people who are thinking about solutions to make it easier than it is on whether or not the public sees it as sustainable. That's not an option at this point. I'll turn it back to you so we can continue the conversation.
Okay, sounds great. We will continue with the Honorable Mayor of the City of Gainesville, Florida, Lauren Poe. And Mayor, if you could talk to us about how you were able to not only engage in this important work, but convince other members of council of the importance.
Thanks. I'm not sure I can answer the second part of the question, but I certainly can wax poetic about the first. We had a lot of help. Larry and his team were instrumental working behind the scenes with our clerk's office and all of our staff to help stand up the infrastructure that was ultimately required to do this. We had a good start. I don't think we were. We weren't starting from a place where we had no utilization of virtual platforms, and we weren't starting from a place where we were scared of doing it. I mean, there was a desire. So it was more about figuring out collectively how to best make it work. And we were like many places. I think I issued my first emergency order I believe it was the 16th of March. We were pretty early on, especially for southern states. And at first it was, you know, I mean, I very just clearly said to the clerk, we're not going to hold any meetings unless there's an absolute emergency need to do so. We need to let everybody just settle down, let our staff figure out what their new lives are going to look like. You know, let our residents, you know, to figure, you know, what are they going to do with their kids? How are they going to learn? All those things. And so we had a few weeks there where literally everybody in our community was adapting to the new circumstances. And that gave us internally the time to figure out how we could resume regular public meetings safely and effectively. And in the meantime, I think we helped our neighbors transition into this new format by conducting weekly telephone town halls. I know that's nothing new or innovative, but they were critical because now there was a direct point of contact between all of our neighbors and me. And we just answered questions. I mean, we would have guests, we'd have themes and kind of give updates, critical updates, that sort of thing. But it was mainly about, you know, being able to connect with folks and get their questions answered either on the spot or by following up. And that was a clear message, I feel like, to all of our neighbors that we were going to continue doing business. They were going to be front and center and included in all that business that we did. And that allowed us to sort of bring them back into the public's process when we started our meetings back, you know, normally. And, you know, we I think really tried to not bite off more than we could chew. So we started just holding meetings in the evening and really only taking up those items that we felt like we were really mission critical. And then eventually kind of got back to our normal schedule where we started our meetings at 1 p.m. and went in well into the evening. We did all of our budget deliberations. And, you know, what I noticed, we had, first of all, we definitely had a large group of neighbors participate that we'd never heard from before, had never come down to City Hall, but added a lot of richness and diversity to our conversations. And that's something as an elected official, you're trying so hard for so long to bring more people into the conversation. Every small to medium-sized city in the country will tell an identical story about the same 5 or 6 people showing up to meetings and claiming to speak for everybody. You know, as an elected official, that can become really challenging because if that's all you're hearing, you begin to believe that might be true. With the evolution that we've seen in the past several months, we've actually realized that diversity of opinion and that diversity of, you know, demographic, you know, that doesn't necessarily have the time to spend all day and night at a commission meeting, you know, sitting there in chambers. And so we stepped up to it. And so by the end, you know, we were going over final budget deliberations to kind of build off what, you know, Graham said. We here in Gainesville have a very active Black Lives Matter movement and Dream Defenders movement. So the defund the police issue kind of came out of nowhere to be a huge thing. You know, they were being very participatory in our meetings and calls, despite being very, very late in the budget process. And that's, you know, part of what we were trying to share with them, that we start these things, you know, 9 months ago and we're really at the end. But, you know, we saw something very quickly happen where we had, you know, many people calling in to argue to defund the police. And then other residents watching who disagreed with that perspective then started calling saying, you know, no, they you know, supported our funding, thought we should spend more in certain areas, had worked very hard over the years to build positive relationships with our police department and police officers. And that wouldn't have happened at an old, as Graham said, an old school meeting. people would not have gotten in their cars and driven down to City Hall. They would have maybe watched it and, you know, tossed some choice words at the TV monitor and, you know, shaken their fist, but they wouldn't have come down and shared that point of view. And so as an elected official, there was a richness involved with those conversations that I have not seen very often. I've been in office off and on since 2008, but I've been around City Hall for 12 years. And I've witnessed some of the most impactful and rich conversations about really heavy duty issues that I've seen in that entire time. So I'm really hopeful. I think the ultimate question that is being asked in this session is this sustainable? I absolutely believe it's sustainable from a technology and infrastructure point of view. I believe it's sustainable from a public desire and enthusiasm about adopting and growing into a sort of hybrid in-person and virtual environment, not just with meetings, but with we're going through a comprehensive plan update. We're going through a redevelopment plan update. I mean, these are ways that can really enhance that process. Our barrier is going to be our state laws governing public meetings and what we're allowed to do and not do outside of an emergency order. And so that's something we've already talked with our state lobbyists that are getting ready for the legislative session this coming year. What might our legislature be willing to reconsider based on positive lessons learned that can really help the public process, help transparency, help us govern better, and help citizens participate better outside of a pandemic or any other type of natural disaster. So that's, I think, the next step in this conversation that we're hoping to have.
Thank you so much, Mayor. We really appreciate those comments. And Courtney, can you talk to us about the question, are virtual public meetings sustainable?
Yes, thanks, Valerie. I appreciate that I have the opportunity to kind of speak after everyone, because I can kind of just add a little bit more to it. I think all of the points that have been raised so far are incredibly valid and important to raise. My quick answer to the question is yes, I believe that virtual public meetings are sustainable. And in fact, I believe that the public is going to expect that going forward. We're more than 6 months into this experience. I think it's going to become a part of the norm and a part of the expectation for how we do business. That said, aside from some of the points that have already come up regarding finding ways to address some of the divides that may exist in terms of technology or even just, comfort level with technology, I think the other opportunity that exists here is to really look at ways that we can continue to innovate in how we hold these public meetings. We've heard a little bit about some of the innovations that have come up, but I think what we're still hearing is traditional public meeting formats where you have the 3 minutes at the mic are really insufficient and also lead to things like 5-hour meetings, which really isn't practical, especially when it comes to public participation. So, we need to really explore the ways that we can increase public input and provide more opportunities for that, but doing it in a both more efficient, but also just a better way overall. One example that I'll bring to the forefront now, this was in person, but certainly can be done in a virtual situation. Several years back, I was working with a state agency that was engaging the public around forest management practices and what the future was going to look like for forests in that state. And what we did, instead of our traditional public meeting, because they had done that, and they had the same voices come in meeting after meeting, sharing their either extreme view to one side or the other, and they really wanted to do something different. So we actually provided opportunity for folks to talk to one another versus just talking at. the public officials. And that really, one, made the meeting more efficient time-wise. We were able to hold a meeting in 2 hours and not extend it out because of the number of people who wanted to make a comment. But it also allowed for that sharing of perspectives. So what Mayor Poe just said in regards to the opportunity that existed in that public meeting around defunding the police and having folks actually be able to react to some of those comments. We can do that, but we can do that in a way where people can hear each other and also the information can be gathered more efficiently. So, I think that's the example I give is from in person, but given the platforms, especially Zoom being so prevalent these days and the simplicity with which it can offer us those opportunities, I think that there's a lot of opportunity here to really look at the formats that we take in doing our public engagement and really finding some ways to innovate that will, both bring more participation and also bring some more sustainable solutions out of those conversations.
Thank you, Courtney. And can we follow up with you next with respect to the notion of using online tools to engage the public? And you certainly know the research that the Kettering Foundation is around engaging people in democratic ways to help solve shared community problems. And do you have some ideas, and I'm going to also ask you the same question, Mayor Poe, some ideas of how online technology might facilitate the opportunity for citizens who often feel sidelined and don't participate in the traditional public processes, how they might be able to become more involved, and how you might, as public officials, as NGOs, help that voice be heard across the spectrum of your community. So Courtney, if you could respond, and then I'll ask Mayor Poe to see what he might have to say about how citizens can use online technology more.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, NCDD just held a big event yesterday that was all about exploring different tools and platforms for engagement. There is a wealth of resources out there that can offer us new and different and innovative ways to engage. And they have varying levels of, kind of familiarity for those who aren't as technologically advanced or may have limitations in terms of internet access and so on. So Graham was actually a part of that event yesterday, and public input was a part of that. But there are so many out there. We're seeing just on the level of creating opportunities for people to connect socially as well as in governance, that there's just a boon of platforms being developed right now, and they're trying to do it in ways that really minimize the technological needs that exist. So, we have Zoom, obviously we're using that today, and that's something that many people are getting used to. And so in terms of just familiarity and accessibility, that's becoming more and more something people are comfortable with, and thankfully also offers the opportunity for folks to join by phone and not just needing that internet access. But there's other tools out there that are web-based that offer people the opportunity to share their views and perspectives, but also view others' views and perspectives in ways that are very interactive. Not just, I would say 10 years ago, a lot of what we saw was much more purely text-based, and it was, taking a look at what others had responded to and responding to that in discussion threads. Great, but not, we've seen so much more developed since then that allows folks to interact, to explore budgeting. There's budgeting software out there now that allows us to, make our own priorities and see kind of what the trade-offs are as we look at, I want to reduce the funding for the police perhaps, and then put it into another category. Or, if we really want to focus on developing, more parks in our community, we have to find a place to take from. And so there's a wealth. There's almost too many options out there right now. So I think it's a matter of, and we certainly don't want to get into the situation that I think Graham described, where there's a million different platforms and you have to use 5 simultaneously. So I think it's a matter of finding what's going to work best for the situations and the conversations that you're looking to have. And there's lots of us out there who are trying to help make that information easier to find and easier to navigate. And I know there's also those out there in technology who are looking to really find ways to bring some of these really great tools into, you know, more of one platform or one tool instead of multiple tools.
Fantastic. Mayor Poe, and then I'm going to ask Graham and Larry to talk a bit about the initial question with an emphasis on the various platforms, connectivity, and how elected officials in particular can make sense of all those different voices from all those different technology tools that Courtney just shared. So Mayor, if you would please.
Sure. So in my day job, I'm a teacher, and when our college was getting ready for this semester, sort of over the summer, prepping all of the professors for mostly a virtual teaching experience. We still have some classes I'm teaching on campus, but the initial point that was made to all of us is that teaching virtually is not teaching live in a classroom with a camera on you. That there are things that you can do in a virtual environment, like a Zoom environment or Microsoft Teams, or Graham's amazing product, I'm sure, that you can't do in person, and there are things you can do in person that you can't do virtually. They both have strengths and they both have drawbacks, and so for us moving forward, it's about learning how to take the best of both worlds and integrate them into a public engagement plan that fully captures and realizes all that added value. And maybe we would have worked our way towards that over the next 5 or 10 years, absent this pandemic. But now we're fully into it, and it's now about how do we, the title of the seminar today, how do we sustain it? And so, I'm looking at questions from Chris. How do we, some work well in one circumstance, and some platforms work well in another, and that's where we are right now. But I think we move forward with both. And when I look at things like how do we build out and make sure that we get as much input as possible as we're implementing our racial equity plan in our city, or how do we really genuinely do participatory budgeting, as we move forward with this next budget cycle that starts literally tomorrow. It's going to be, we're not going to do things only virtually or only at neighborhood meetings and regular city commission meetings. We're going to do all of those things, and it's how we weave them together and make sure that the participation we get from all those formats is layered in such a way to give a very meaningful sort of final product to the policymakers, to the decision makers on the commission. That's where we're going to see, I think, just a lot of opportunity, and I'm very hopeful towards that. And we live in a community, and we have a commission that's fully ready to embrace that. And that's what we've seen so far. I think it's more about working with our partners that provide the platforms to figure out what works best for Gainesville, and that's maybe not what's going to work best for Asheville or Chicago or anywhere else. But we have so many different options and opportunities that we actually can realistically set that as a goal to develop an overall plan that will absolutely work for our needs here, and feel really good about the product that we're going to get back from that.
Fantastic. Graham, can you kind of extend it again, as I mentioned, talking about the diversity of the platforms and how do we make sense out of what is heard?
I think that Courtney and the mayor bring up really, really strong points in that there are different types of engagement, and public engagement in general, right? There are large, think about federally funded transportation project where the FHWA, right, has an arm in it, and there's NEPA compliance requirements. Those are big, broad. They require you to demonstrably reach environmental justice communities. and Title VI, obviously. The other side of that, though, right, is the more hyper focused, we'll call them sort of steering committees, stakeholder groups, and there are shortcomings with regards to a platform, admittedly ours, right, that is focused on big representative audiences that are in compliance with federal mandates, and of course, right, the ability for anybody to comment on a large topic like reparations or police reform. The discussion that Courtney mentioned, those small round tables where we all sit down, there's 6 of us, and we come out of it with some post-it notes, the older way of doing it suddenly again, that is incredibly difficult. And so I think you need to identify, before you go and look at a platform, what you want from your public engagement efforts. You need to know if it's focused on a big representative audience, or if it's going to be more specific about, maybe a small area plan. If you're talking about some of the comp plan issues that the mayor mentioned, these require ideation, and we'll tell you in our platform you can do that. All of the platforms, right, that are out there selling themselves will say, yeah, you can flex us, you can configure us, and the truth is you can, but is it the best? Sometimes I think that a simple Zoom call or a WebEx call where you do allow for people to call in, they all provide phone lines now for people to participate. Google Meet, trying to compete again. They say, oh, are you driving? Cool, call the number, and you can still be a part of that conversation. Keep it simple, right? It's at any opportunity. But that said, when we talk about the things that really keep, I guess, me up at night, right, when we're looking at sustainable virtual public meetings, I kind of thought, early on we thought, okay, what are the requirements to check? At the most basic, what are the requirements that any kind of virtual public meeting has to fulfill? And so those 5 are: there has to be a way for multiple presenters to be remote, right? Like if somebody isn't healthy or feels unsafe on council or as a part of a steering committee, right, they have to be able to engage remotely like we are. The second is you have to be able to capture, moderate, if it's separate, and retain public comments, right? That attribution is critical when we're talking about freedom of information and that accessibility. And then the third is easy open access for residents who don't have broadband. There is not just an issue with internet availability, but there's also an issue with the time to do it. We have jobs that take us, late hours and third shifts. We have people who work on the move, or people who just aren't savvy enough. So it's not about access to internet. It's also another layer, several layers on top. And the fourth is open participation without a personal computer, because we don't talk about the Pew Research that shows how many people in minority groups are relying on their mobile phones for data. 35%, I think, of Hispanics, according to Pew, use nothing but their smartphones for their internet access. And then the last is, of course, we see issues with hijacking and trolling, where people who are unwanted join these. So just a little bit of content there, 5 different things that we said at the most basic, before you say big, broad representation. Those 5 things, I think, span all of the different things we have to look for.
Okay. Larry.
It's funny, when Courtney was saying we probably have too many options, I was going to tease Graham and say we don't need public input, but I take that back. He made too many good points there.
I try to be reasonable, I guess.
I mean, this is such a rich discussion, and I, as I'm sure everybody can tell that's listening, this is something that the 4 of us, well, I don't know about the mayor, he's a really busy guy, but I think the other 3 of us could talk for hours about this. And one thing I guess that I would just add, I agree with all that's been said, but I guess one thing I would like to add is just the consideration of what some people in our field call permanent civic infrastructure, because I think a lot of the best work that's happened in at least the US, I think it's different in Canada, Australia, parts of UK, Europe, elsewhere, but a lot of the US work has been very episodic, right? So we're doing our comprehensive plan, and so we've got this really cool web portal for that, or our budget, and we've got a cool tool to examine trade-offs for it. And sometimes that gets repeated year on year. But I think that one of the things that's interesting about Graham's company and about some of the other, what I would call industry leaders, is that they're recognizing that this shouldn't be episodic, that it should become routine. And it certainly is in Gainesville. They've got some tools in place that, very much serve, year-round kind of engagement needs. But I think that, it requires a municipality or a county or another agency to do some deep thinking and some self-examination around, what consistently do they want to accomplish with public engagement, topic in and topic out, circumstance in and circumstance out? And what are the things that sort of have to be incorporated no matter what? I mean, I know pandemic wasn't something that we, any of us thought we would need to sort of game plan for, but, if we can't have in person, or if we only can have in person, I mean, I can't think of that scenario right off the top of my head, but maybe that would exist. Or if we know that we're going to reach a population where English is not their most comfortable language, or if we know that we need to talk about something that is extremely sensitive, and so online might, have some challenges with it that we need to account for. So it's not so much necessarily about, pick one platform or pick one tool. It's about almost the way we would have in our homes, like a lot of tools that we might only use once a year or once every few months, but we still want to know that we have them, hammers and, other screwdrivers that we may only need occasionally and stuff like that. I think the same holds true for public engagement. Thinking of more than just that moment out, but out a year, 5 years, and saying, what do we want to be able to engage the public on? And by extension, what are the kinds of things we want to be able to ask, both at an in-person setting and virtually? And I just want to make one other quick point to Courtney's, which is, I like the premise of this panel, which is, are virtual meetings sustainable? But I do think it becomes very meta or existential. Like, what is a virtual meeting? What is a meeting? In other words, if a meeting is taken in the context of public meeting, posted 72 hours in advance, 3 minutes a person, that's one thing. But I know Valerie well enough, and Courtney and Mayor Poe and Graham, to know that, we think a lot bigger than that and differently. And so I think it's important to not just think about whether we can sustain having people show up to official meetings and participate virtually, but having people participate in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different circumstances, with the help of technology.
Thank you. Panel, Chris wants to know, what can be done for local government jurisdictions, and his example was a school board, who are convening online, but the technology is so poor quality-wise that it's hard for people to be able to understand what's being said. It's inaudible, and it is also, Chris says, unwatchable. In these days of limited resources, what are options for those institutions to consider?
Well, I think Courtney said this, and so I don't mean to repeat, but I mean, it's a lot easier than you think just to enable somebody to call in and listen to a meeting. I mean, it takes very little, and Graham can attest to that too. And, I can say, with direct evidence that we've had people in the city of Gainesville tell us something similar. In fact, that might even be a Gainesvillian, Gainesvillian, I don't know, who had that, who had that comment. But there's got to be redundancies or backups, in almost any circumstance. I mean, there's situations where the main TV station, is not functioning, but they're able to stream, or vice versa. So, I think and that's why when I do televised meetings, I'm sort of creating those redundant systems, like the broadcast on your regular TV, the stream on both YouTube and elsewhere, the call-in numbers in English and Spanish. So there's a very low cost associated with providing sort of an audio-only access point. Where I lived in Austin, there was a radio station that had a contract to carry city council meetings on the radio, a community radio station that did that. There are a lot of radio stations that would welcome being able to fill some programming hours with something like that. So I just think that it really does not have to be a major investment of funds, but it does require some creativity and a willingness to experiment to make sure that you've got some contingency plans, if nothing else.
Others?
As the technological sort of counterpart to Larry, I think that Chris brings up a really good point with regards to the technical hurdles. Every local government at the moment is strapped for, I can't imagine what the mayor is dealing with the budget and the decisions, right, that have to be made. So saying go buy, right, some platform that's dedicated to this may not be an option. I will entirely agree with Larry. This is about giving people as many different avenues to participate in as possible. I actually was the executive director of the National Freedom of Information Coalition. Dan and I had a conversation about some of the language that legal lawyers in various states had advised local governments with, and they generally, we summed it up to say it's got to be multiple and redundant, right, formats to participate. So just a Zoom call is not going to meet the requirements that we set, or the standards that we set for an open public meeting, right? Or just a teletown hall, in the same sense in the other direction. So we need to make sure that we're providing multiple and redundant ways so that if one doesn't work, if one is, poor quality, there's an easy way to switch. Actually, the facilitators of this panel today said, hey, connect your internet to the Ethernet cable, but in case you get poor quality, have your phone ready so you can dial back into the panel. That's the standard we have to set. We have to, in every effort, make sure that people have a couple of options, because you're bound to have technical difficulties. It's inevitable, regardless of the kind of technology you're using and then the amount of prep you took.
Thank you. Emily would like to know if anyone is concerned that public officials might eliminate in-person meetings and that all of the interactions are online. Mayor Poe, might you kick off the...
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Valerie. I could probably answer or try to answer both of Emily's questions, and I'll state her second one before I do. I don't think there's any danger of that. First of all, I mean, I think most states' public meeting requirements are not going to allow that to happen. Certainly, that's going to be the case in Florida. In Florida, our governor has moved us to phase 3 and rescinded most of the provisions in the emergency order. We'll find out. He very often he waits till the last day of the month to do any extensions, whether it's for evictions or virtual public meetings or not. So we'll know. But right now, we're planning for our next regularly scheduled meeting to be in person. So we'll have to see. But I don't think anybody would voluntarily just go virtual anyway. It's I think I don't think there's anything to be gained in that, and there's a lot to be lost. And then Emily's second question, which I think it relates to this because it really has to do with transparency and public records. Are there example of public meeting prep, like conversation threads that happen prior to a meeting that are residents that want to participate could get their hands on, look at, to be prepared? Because she says often public testimony is given, but votes already seem to be in place. Well, in Florida, no conversation can take place outside of a public meeting. So for us, that isn't an issue because any conversations that are being had, every member of the public has the ability to access, including going back and looking at previous meetings, recordings of previous meetings. But that might not be I know Florida has one of the strictest public records laws and sunshine laws in the country, if not the most. So, if there are places where, say, elected officials can have a sort of offline chat, and hammer out where they stand on an issue and trade votes and decide, what the outcome are before any public input, that's not a great process. And I think, the citizen initiative there should be to work on at a state level, getting sort of more meaningful state public meeting laws in place. So everyone is required to show, you know, it. So we can't even have those conversations, at least in places where they do allow you to have those conversations, that they should be publicly available in advance of the meeting. And so I think there's a legislative solution to that. And if the state legislature isn't interested, you can certainly put pressure on local governments to require that. They can certainly require it of themselves. And I think it would be pretty hard for local elected officials to say, no, we don't want the public to know what we're talking about before we vote. I don't think those folks would extend another term in office. So I think there could be a really successful and not very difficult to put together citizen movement there to make that change at your local government, wherever Emily is from.
I don't know, Valerie, if it's appropriate to share with all attendees, but just adding to what the mayor said, City of Austin actually acted on a state law that enabled there to be a publicly accessible forum online where council members could discuss matters prior to them coming before them formally. And I don't know if the administrator, the host of the meeting, can share the link. It's austincouncilforum.org. But it came in the wake of some concerns about a lack of transparency, a lack of the ability of the public to kind of know what was going on. And so the legislature said, well, we'll put some fences around this, but if you do this kind of site, you can sort of deliberate in public, in between meetings. So I think there's some real value to that. I also just want to say that, threaded discussion is something that I consider to be extremely important for the public to be able to use in a virtual setting, particularly an online setting, because of the benefits of hearing what other perspectives there might be, responding to those, and for the benefit of the elected officials or the decision makers to see how diverse the range of opinions might be. Of course, a moderator is helpful for those kinds of forums, but nevertheless, they, I think, serve a high level of value.
We had one last question that we're not going to be able to get to, and I would simply respond to Maggie that the goal of all of us is to ensure that whether you're meeting in person or online, that the meetings are vibrant, that they provide an opportunity for public input, and your term was good, and that they're good whether you're there physically or you're there online virtually. So with that, panel, I want to thank you so much for a wonderful conversation this afternoon. You did a terrific job in responding to the question, and I think we have decided that the answer is yes. Virtual public meetings are sustainable. So again, thanks.
Since this is government, we should say I think.
I've staffed elected officials, so I'm used to just sitting still when they say the I, so it's all practice. But we do have another presentation at the top of the hour. So for those of you who are participating in the conference, please stay tuned for what's next. And once again, let's give a virtual round of applause to our outstanding panelists for tackling such an important problem for us today. So guys, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. We really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.